Hi, my name is Romero. My major is Interdisciplinary Studies, EC through 6. What do you remember most about learning science in elementary or middle school? I remember the more memorable parts of science in elementary and middle school, like the teacher's personas, activities that are embedded with certain feelings, and content that I either use and see now. However, I do not remember much beyond this. In elementary, activities were more hands-on and concrete than abstract like in middle school. However, I remember vividly more of the feeling of my mind being blown away or being taught something that I could not conceptualize before, which filled my body with a jolt of energy. There was tension and excitement. How do you feel about science? I would not say I love it with a passion, but I am interested, especially when I understand it. I feel if taught and explained right, it becomes fun and leaves us wanting more, which should be true for all content areas. How have your feelings changed over time? Up until now, I have always liked science. However, in school I felt pressure to ask more about my grades than to ask a question, as well as the majority of the time I was being taught for major exams instead of being taught to understand the concepts of the content, where information eventually went in from one ear and out the other. In recent years, believing in being a lifelong learner, I now try to learn what I can on my own and that pertain to my interests. How do you think your school science experiences impacted your attitude towards science? I would say school had a positive impact on my attitude towards science, even though I stressed more over grades than understanding the content. However, I was fortunate enough to have a few passionate teachers who piqued my interest in science and who developed my ability to doubt and inquiry. How do you think your school science experiences impacted your understanding of science? Um, it built a foundation, which generally taught me that it all starts with just a question. What experiences made it easier and harder for you to learn science? I would not say the content was what brought frustration, but solely the teachers. They made it or broke it for me. There were teachers who would stop briefly until we understood concepts and passionately drove the class with an understanding on how to teach their content area. Although other times some teachers were dull and monotonely spoke to the board thinking information will be instilled. What did your teachers do or not do to connect science to your home, cultural, community experiences? How do you think this impacted your experience? More memorable teachers brought up their own experiences, cultures, and communities to explain material and were relatable since majority of my school's demographic included students and administration that were Hispanic. If memory serves me right, in middle school, my sixth grade teacher, science teacher, Mr. Molina, asked if carne asada was our typical weekend, and being in the Valley, Mo said yes. He explained his grilling process, which led up to him explaining the process of heat transforming the molecular structure of meat through chemical reactions, where heat breaks down proteins and sugars within the meat into new chemical compounds. While being entertained, we were engaged and learning at the same time, which changed science into something fun to learn about. Now, every time our family grills, I only picture this process. When science teaches me something in a new light, I can only see it in that perspective. How was your science learning supported at home and in your community? I do not have much on the community, but what only comes to mind is a science fair, where my parents would help or facilitate in my experiments through explicit instructions left by my teacher. My parents believed in a little help here and there, but beyond that, we would have to be independent in our work. I guess following instructions. My parents would guide me through the scientific method to a T, as well as when I had separate questions, my parents would either have an answer or would look it up. Overall, my science learning was fully supported at home. Did your parents or other family members engage in activities involving science? No, unless watching science channels counts as an engaging activity involving science, then yes. The only exception would be my older sister, who in high school was in a medical program. Did you do any activities that involved or applied science outside of school? No, I had a sedentary lifestyle, playing video games and binge watching videos and movies, which were not related to science in any way. In what ways were you alike or different from the other students in your science classes? The demographic within my classes were a balanced amount of females and males who were Hispanic, Mexican American, and either well versed in English and or Spanish, which were similarities I shared. When it came to our socioeconomic status or science background, this information was not publicized. I can say that others looked more well off than I was through aesthetics and accessories. However, I cannot judge a book by its cover. How do you think your experiences, feelings, and beliefs might impact the kind of science teacher that you will be, or the kind of teacher that you want to be? Everything up until now will definitely influence my future self and my future profession. I remember how I felt to count the days till summer, which, reflecting on it, seems rather the opposite of how I would want to see my students. If that ever happened, it would mean I, as a teacher, did a disservice to those students by not teaching them to embrace their innate curiosity and making it inherent. I want to teach kids that learning is not a chore and to aspire to be lifelong learners, to the point that once they get out of class or school, they whisper to themselves that they want to learn more and come back without being hesitant, as well as distilling the idea of learning ends once school or class is over. Do you remember any memory from your science teacher that made you interested or hate on science? There was Mr. Crook, who I think was my seventh grade teacher. He had a persona of a crazy mad scientist that had a few crooked nails, which was his own credited joke. Aside from teachers with personas, those who were nurturing and made an effort on building a relationship within the classroom that felt more like a familial community, a family, stuck and stood out. More importantly, these teachers would say that there were no wrong answers, which embraced my curiosity and initiative to learn on my own, and probably saved my liking of science. Do you remember hearing anything from your parents or teachers about their relationship between science and religion? From the top of my head, I don't think my parents had any complaints or disbeliefs in science. Their relationship between both science and religion was pretty tamed. As for teachers, I'm guessing the same, since I believe they kept it professional with no opinion on sensitive topics like this. Do you remember any memory from your science teacher to make science more accessible to ESL students? I do not recall much other than the incorporation of Spanish to transition between translations of science terminology and maybe visuals during presentations with more explicit explanations and details. Are there any elements in your culture that can be considered as a barrier to learn science or pursue a career in science? I would say no. My parents always encouraged the idea that the sky has no limits and to échale ganas, meaning giving it your best. Um, Pertaining to my profession, I'm free to do whatever makes me happy, maybe being a sort of scientist or a teacher. The only expectations expected of me is to do whatever it takes to get there and to never give up. Are there any elements in your culture that can be considered as a benefit to learn science or pursue a career in science? I do not know if there are any elements within my culture that would benefit me in science in any way. However, like I said, my parents are liberal when it comes to my education, profession wise. Just as long as I'm happy, do my best and never give up. How are you going to use your culture to support your future students? I will be firm but nurturing with my students. I will tell them that there will be help along the way, but ultimately they will have to strive towards their own ideal futures. instill in them the idea of being lifelong learners that can be driven by their own curiosity. Give them the same encouragement my parents and teachers gave me through an open mind, where their ideas and answers flourish, as well as their aspirations by saying their lives and the power that they have to change the world knows no boundaries, and the only limitations they have is their imagination.